Yeah, I'm not an expert. I don't know Romanian. I've never been to Romania, and I do apologise if I mispronounce any names. But I do know that since 2005, when I saw Death of Mr. Lazarescu in Cannes, I've been following Romanian cinema with enormous interest. The films have been turning up regularly at festivals, and it's quite often a very good idea to go and check out any Romanian films at any festivals, because they're often amongst the best things on view. Death of Mr. Lazarescu was seen as a bit of a turning point. It was quickly followed by some other rather successful and critically admired films, and it was followed 2 years later by the Palme d'Or win for 4 months, 3 weeks and 2 days. But things had been happening before then, of course. Some of the filmmakers had already made short films. Indeed, Cristi Puiu, the director of Death of Mr. Lazarescu, had won a Berlin Golden Bear for his short film, Cigarettes and Coffee. And he'd also made a very good feature, Stuff and Dough, which some people say is the start of the new look Romanian cinema. Whether it is or not, I don't know, but it's certainly a very good place to start if you're interested in trying to follow a chronological survey of the films. It's been rather amazing what Romania has managed to do in terms of its filmmaking in the last 15 years. Quite often the funding has been very low indeed. I think Radu Juda told me there was one Romanian film made in 2000. And a lot of the films are made on resources that other countries would find rather paltry. But what they do show is that what really counts in filmmaking, as in most arts, is imagination and invention and intelligence rather than money. And indeed, we've seen this in other cases. When the Argentinian cinema was very strong a few years ago, Argentina was actually, going through something of a crisis. National cinemas all have their ups and downs. In the 50s, Japan was terrific, perhaps not so great today. Italy in the 60s was particularly fine. The rise of Chinese and Taiwanese cinema in the 1980s. These things ebb and flow, rise and fall, and actually only the other night Nick Roddick at a talk we had about Romanian cinema in the library was saying that if there was a Romanian new wave, it's definitely broken. I don't think we should even talk about a new wave. There was a new look of cinema. There was certainly, I think, a reaction against the filmmaking style and practices that had gone before. There had been terrific filmmakers, like Lucian Pintilli is probably the best known, but I think there was a reaction in the early 2000s where people wanted to do something a little bit more stripped back, a little bit more realist in tone. Quite often, a lot of the Romanian films before that seem to have been, they were very often very fine films, but they were often in the forms of allegories or comic satires, but not always in the sort of realist mode that we've come to recognise over the last 15 years. And it is that realist mode that I found particularly interesting. I'm hoping that I won't bore you with why I think it's interesting, and it's not just about style, it's also about content. I selected the films in the season. I would have liked to have shown more. It pains me to have only one film by Corneliu Porumboiu, one film by Radu Juda, although it is an extended run of Afarim. It would have been nice to have more films by a lot of filmmakers, and some filmmakers didn't even make it into the final selection. That's because we only had space for so much in the programme. And I absolutely wanted to make as a sort of centrepiece or side piece, or whatever you want to call it, a retrospective of the films of Cristi Puiu, who I myself consider one of the most interesting filmmakers in the world today. I think, without further ado, we should probably go with the first clip now, and then I'll talk about that afterwards. Thank you.